there is a sort of presumption, I think, we've come across it in a number of cases, this presumption that if the Westerners, if the Europeans go into a place, they bring certain evils into an effectively Edenic society, that the locals are otherwise living unbothered by modernity, by the vices of humankind. Obviously this wasn't the case. But it seems that people are very reluctant to recognize that there's a balance of things going on here, at the very least.
Yeah, well, not only that the pre-colonial societies were not the Garden of Eden, far from it, and had any of those pre-colonial societies been literate, or had record-keeping traditions, we would have more information on that. We don't. So what do you turn to? You turn to the civilization that produced records and newspaper articles and parliamentary inquiries and academic researches and whatnot, which is the European civilization. So just the knowledge base is hugely biased towards the European colonial experience, and in particular because it comes with a self-critical tradition, a lot of that knowledge is critical. So this is somehow evidence that it was the Garden of Eden before European colonialism. Is clearly not the case.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So in the last couple of episodes, we talked about many aspects of civilizational values, whether it's the notion of inequality or the notion of sacrifice. Then we also talked about, like in one of my other videos, we talked about two elements of anti-civilization. Okay, these are the enemies of civilization. We talked about bigotry and of course cowardice. Like if you have a civilization that is full of these elements, then this civilization cannot be protected, cannot be salvaged. But now in this final episode, we will talk about a very important but often overlooked aspect of civilization. Now look, I really didn't want to make all of these videos, but the reason for making these videos is to have a dialogue. Okay, and I do understand that a lot of people are very offended by what I already said, and in this episode I think that you will be offended even more by what I'm about to say. But guess what? If you want to talk about civilization, at some point you have to face this criticism. At some point you have to engage in a dialogue, and this dialogue may not be very pleasant to go through for a lot of people, especially if you are a staunch supporter of Judeo-Christian values. But my hope is that at least I will be able to learn something out of this. If you can leave a comment, if you can leave your thoughts, I will try my best to, of course, correct my own understanding and also engage in a dialogue with you. At least that's what I'm hoping. My intention is to learn something, is to get into a dialogue, is to engage in a dialogue with someone who is not coming from my background, who is coming from a different background, who is coming from a different cultural or civilizational perspective. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Okay, in this section there will be some overlap, but I just want to point out some of the most hypocritical things that we happen to witness. See, East and West, we coming from the East and people coming from Judeo-Christian philosophies, predominantly they consider themselves to be the West. So what we witnessed, like people coming from non-Abrahamic background, okay, people coming from the East, what we witnessed, see, we don't necessarily hate the West. We don't necessarily hate people coming from Judeo-Christian background. But if you look at history, the amount of violence, the amount of hatred that has been produced by these Judeo-Christian philosophies, it is no surprise that some of these people, I'm not saying that everyone, some of these people even today, how they view the East, how they look at the East.
When he quotes Dalrymple's position on Ashoka being half Greek, why is it that there is this dying need on the part of this white man to look for everything that is white, even in Bharat's history? So there's a fantastic book of Thomas Trautmann, you should read it. It's a series of books that he's written on the Aryan invasion theory, its origins. You will never be able to understand the caste debate without understanding the history of Aryan invasion theory and vice versa. Remember that. When you're reading Indian history, that is the thumb rule. So when these people come to this country, they're like, we have colonized so many places. It's like the juggernaut of the Australian team finally being defeated in Calcutta. It comes here and then it's asked, these guys are boggled. This fellow is black. He is an idol worshipper. He's a polytheist. And still he is culturally and spiritually superior to us. That question is repeated over and over again in their personal correspondence because they're hoping to find a fully inferior civilization, which is a defeated civilization. But a defeated civilization is not necessarily an inferior civilization. That is the realization that leads them to the point. If they are superior in some way, then that superiority must be traced back to us. And hence starts the reverse engineering of Indian history by bringing in the Aryan angle that everything that white stands for victory, and therefore at some point some fellow who was white would have come here, inseminated the blood here, and from there these guys must have become victorious. That is this dying need. So around that period they had something called the Tree of Civilization. The Tree of Civilization is the mapping of different civilization based on their superiority and inferiority, which they had mapped for themselves, and who you think would be at the top of that particular pecking order. It has to be the white man. How is this entire thing worked out? Language becomes the basis for understanding somebody's race. Their inability to wrap their heads around Sanskrit leads to the conclusion that Sanskrit must necessarily be a white contribution and therefore an Aryan contribution, and from there starts the analysis of the Aryan invasion theory. We continue to spew this nonsense in today's Dravidinist politics in the South. This is literally, pun intended, the Bible of the Dravidinists. Because this is what they swear by when they push their agenda of Brahmin versus non-Brahmin, therefore Aryan versus non-Aryan and Dravidian, therefore North Indian versus South Indian.
First of all, there is sheer hypocrisy. Second of all, there is sheer condescension. And of course, lies and propaganda. Like if you look at these lies and propaganda, that comes predominantly from the Islamic world. This is not necessarily related to the, the Judeo-Christian, like the Christian communities or Christian countries. These lies and propaganda comes predominantly from the Muslim world. Obviously, there is a lack of trust, to put it very, very lightly. When you look at how the Islamic communities treated the polytheists, the Hindus and Buddhists and so on, how they treated the polytheists over the history, this is beyond any kind of reconciliation. Just beyond. The sheer brutality, the sadistic nature of these atrocities is just beyond imagination in many cases. And then you see the sheer amount of hypocrisy that exists within the Muslim world. And this sheer hypocrisy have been supported, have been enabled by the so-called civilized people, by the so-called West. Let's say, for instance, like these examples are not really far-fetched. Let's say, for instance, the case of Bangladesh independence. I'm talking about 1971. The civilized people, they supported Pakistan, the barbarians, they supported the savages. In 1971, when they knew that completely innocent civilians, the Hindus, have been massacred. About out of 3 million victims, a staggering 80% were the Hindus. And who enabled this genocide? United States, the so-called flag bearer of democracy. United States knew about all these things and they nonetheless supported Pakistan. And you know what the history of the British colonization in India. Some $43 trillion have been looted. And sometimes you listen to some of the comments, let's say for instance the Chandrayaan 3, when India launched its mission to Chandrayaan 3, how some of the British media actually reacted to that success. It was a success for all of humanity. Landing on the dark side of moon. Nobody has ever done that in the history, but when India did it, how the British media reacted to that success, again with hypocrisy and condescension.
Let's start our next story with a cartoon. It's from the New York Times. It shows two men sitting inside a room. It's called the Elite Space Club. One of them is reading a newspaper. The headline says, India's Mars mission. It is shown as a man with a cow. India is shown as a man with a cow knocking on the door. I'm sure you'll agree that this is racist and in very poor taste. I'm sure you've seen the cartoon before, including on this show. We've been asking for an updated version. Will the New York Times publish something that is more in tune with reality? We're not holding our breath for a response, because the West is back to playing its old games, discrediting India's achievements and questioning India's motives. Let me lay out the facts first. Chandrayaan 3 is an Indian mission in space. It is the world's first to land on the moon's south pole. This is a fact. As we speak, the Pragyan rover is out exploring, looking for traces of water. This too is a fact. Also a matter of pride for India. A big achievement for science and a gift to the world. But how have they responded? With skepticism, condescension, and their trademark hypocrisy. Listen to this.
As they spend their money on space probes, as they spend their money on the military, they spend their money on nuclear weapons, still half of the country lives below the poverty line. But the biggest injustice of all.
That was Nigel Farage, the man who heralded Brexit, a politician known for his scandals and his hypocrisy. He says India is wasting money on space missions. Why? Because half of its population lives in poverty. The racism is shining through. Also the utter disconnect with reality. We are happy to share some facts with Mr. Farage. It may have slipped his notice that India is the world's 5th largest economy. It is in fact ahead of his country, the United Kingdom. But it seems he can't get rid of his colonial mindset. I mean, how can poor India have aspirations? How can a former colony reach the moon before the so-called Great Britain? And since he's so keen on discussing priorities, we have a question for him. Why does Britain keep paying for the royal family? Their citizens cannot afford their electricity bills. Maybe help them instead of paying for the king and his retinue. Let me show you another bizarre comment. This is from a man called Patrick Christie's. He calls himself a journalist, and this is what he said.
Congratulate India on landing on the dark side of the moon. I would also like to now invite India to return the £2.3 billion foreign aid money that we sent them between 2016 and 2021. We're also set to give them £57 million next year, but I think the British taxpayer should keep hold of that, don't you? We should not be giving money to countries with a space programme. As a rule, if you can afford to fire a rocket at the dark side of the moon, you shouldn't be coming to us with your hand out.
You heard him. If you can afford to fire a rocket, you shouldn't be coming to us with your hand out for foreign aid. Those were his words. But is India going to the UK for foreign aid? Let's have the answer from their own Foreign Office. This is what they said, and I'm quoting. Since 2015, the UK has given no financial aid to the government of India. Most of our funding now is focused on business investments, which help create new markets and jobs for the UK as well as India. This is what their Foreign Office has said. Christie's also mentioned a figure, £2.3 billion. What about that? It's from a report by the UK aid spending watchdog ICAI, and Patrick Christie's clearly did not read the whole report, but we did it for him.
And when it comes to the reparations, like, these are the historic wrongdoings. We haven't seen the so-called civilized people talking about these wrongdoings that, oh look, we have done something very, 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 very brutal against the Hindus. Against the Hindus, this is a particular community, the Hindu community. And then you see the West sending missionaries to India when the people are, they are being starved to death. Okay, when people of Bengal have been starved to death, enabled by the British, the father of the Great Britain, a degenerate bastard called Winston Churchill, a bastard who enabled this genocide, okay, and then after all of these things have happened, what do you get? Not only that you don't get the reparations, not only that you don't get the acknowledgement of these atrocities, in return you get condescension. In return you get mocking, you get sheer amount of indiscriminate judgmental comments from the so-called flag bearers of democracy. Do you really believe that these comments really make like positive impact on the people, on the minds of the people coming from the East? So I just gave you a couple of examples, and then you look at, let's say for instance, the Hindus in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Okay, these Hindus are living under death pretty much. There are thousands of Hindu girls being forcefully converted, being abducted, like, the life under Islam. First of all, Islam has its own sheer hypocrisy, which has never changed in the last 200 years. Like I'm talking about the Western liberalism, that period. In the last 200 or 250 years, it has never changed. Their hypocrisy remained at its own level, if not gotten any worse. So my observation is that what did the West have done? What was the contribution of the West? Was it for something positive or was it for something negative? I'm sorry to say, or maybe I'm not really sorry to say, that you guys have done to contribute to something that is negative. You look at the amount of attention that has been given to India. The amount of attention that has been given to India when it comes to the Muslims. But then you look at how the Hindus have been treated in Pakistan and Bangladesh. How many times have you seen the Western media, the so-called flag bearer of democracy, okay, people who are lecturing about morality and civilization and freedom, when you talk to the civilized people, what is their assessment? So we brought civilization, we brought equality, we brought freedom. Have you? What freedom does these people enjoy living under Islam in Bangladesh? People, the Hindus that are living as minorities in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan there used to be, but they're all extinct. So what else are you going to talk about? All the 57 countries where minorities are pretty much extinct. When the so-called civilized people are lecturing about, oh, we brought civilization, we brought freedom, we brought this, we brought that. Have you brought freedom? Really? And then of course you see how some of these, like the big names I'm talking about. I am talking about the really big names. They are the ones saying that, oh look, we, that we owe, that the East owes to the West for being colonized by the West. That this colonization, this violent, brutal episode of history is justified by the West, that you are robbed. The logic is this, that you are robbed, now you owe to the robber. You have been looted. Whom do you owe? You owe to your looter, to the invader. And then again, you keep hearing about the lectures of civilization, democracy, equality and all this nonsense. Do you think these kind of lecturing, these kind of condescending remarks actually win hearts? I mean, do you really believe so? If you were coming from the West, do you really believe that you have done anything positive for the people coming from the East, right? You lecture about, first of all, you stole, not only that the $43 trillion have been stolen, guess what else has been done? Their ideas. Where have you got all these ideas of civilization? Who gave you civilization? As I discussed, all of these things are coming from Bharat. Any area of civilization, whether it's art, science, culture, philosophy, mathematics, any area of civilization. You heard me right. This is not a made-up statement, by the way. Every area of civilization originated in Bharat, originated in India. And if you don't know about it, then it is time to learn about it. Because guess what? These lies, again, it is propagated by the West. Not only that you have done a physical genocide, you have slaughtered hundreds of millions of people. That's one aspect of this genocide. Also, you have done the cultural genocide. You have burned the libraries. Now, burning the libraries also, mostly it was done by the savages, the nomad savages, the Muslim savages. They are the one contributed the most, but nonetheless, the so-called West, they have also contributed to this genocide, to this cultural genocide. So do you honestly believe that stealing someone's idea, why am I saying that, oh, you have contributed to this genocide? Have you given the credit? When it comes to, let's say, number system, when it comes to language, have you given the credit to the Indians? They are the one who gave it to the world. Have you given the credit to them? No. You stole their ideas, and guess what you did? You branded it as your own. That we gave it I'm talking about the Greeks. The Greek civilization is the parent civilization of the current Judeo-Christian civilization. So, from whom did the Greeks learn these things? They learned it from the Hindus. They learned it from Indians, from the Bharatiyas. So, have you given the credit to the Bharatiyas? To the Indians? No. You gave the credit to the Greeks. So, have you contributed anything positive? Like I gave you multiple examples. I gave you the Hindus living under plight in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. Like there are 57 Muslim countries. Most of the Muslim countries, minorities doesn't exist. Let's talk about multiculturalism and diversity of Islam on another day, right? But have you, coming from the West, have you actually contributed in these areas? You haven't. And then when it comes to the cultural genocide, once again, you didn't give the credits to the Bharatiyas. You stole their ideas and branded it as your own. And you enabled genocide. Not only that you enabled genocide through your own colonization, then again when the Muslims slaughtered hundreds of millions of people, you enabled them, you supported them. And then again, you claim that you are the flag bearer of democracy. I am talking about United States to be precise. So over the last couple of thousand years, what we have witnessed, like basically a template that has been played out in this region, in the Indian subcontinental region. Whether it's a physical genocide, like I'm talking about genocide of the people, or it is a cultural genocide. Whether it's the genocide of the people, like I'm talking about like a en masse annihilation of the people, or the genocide of the cultures, whether it's the destruction of the temples, whether it's taking over our language, whether it's, vilifying people for their beliefs. All of those things have been done with an intention to annihilate the existence of Bharat as a people, as an entity, as a civilizational entity, as a culture. Basically, this was the template. And these genocide have been conducted by the people coming from Abrahamic background. So we have every reason to actually hate the West or Abrahamic philosophies. We have every good reason. Nonetheless, we don't necessarily hate the West, but what we witnessed, that West hates the East. That is my understanding of history. Correct me if I am wrong. What has been done over the last 2,000-3,000 years, even then, we keep hearing that, oh, these are the Westerners who brought civilization, who brought the number system, who brought the knowledge. Like, who gave knowledge to the humanity? Or every aspect of civilization, whether it's art, culture, philosophy, every aspect of civilization came out of Bharat, came out of India. But how many times have you seen the Western people giving a credit, even a casual reference that, oh look, we don't own this credit. These are the Indians who actually gave all of these things to us. How many times do you think that the Western people, the so-called civilized people, actually even casually give credits to the Indians? If very few, very rarely, if any at all. What does this tell you? Look, I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone, okay? This video is about Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson is talking about peace. Dr. Peterson said that he wants to make peace.
Is there an ultimate purpose of life?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
What we're doing here,
Which is what?
hopefully trying to make peace.
His word, not mine, that the ultimate purpose of life is about making peace. So how do you want to make peace? You want to make peace through strength or through weakness? If you cannot have that mental courage to acknowledge that a horrible thing has been done in your name, in the name of your God, if you cannot even acknowledge the problem, if you don't have that mental strength, whatever else you are, you can claim everything. Do you think you will be civilized or you will be regarded as civilized by other people? You plagiarize their ideas, you claim credit for it, and you don't give credit to them even after knowing that it is not yours. Not only that you are doing all these things, but guess what? In some discussion, like there are some very prominent thinkers, not necessarily Dr. Peterson, there are some prominent thinkers, let's say for instance Douglas Murray. Look, I had a lot of respect for Douglas Murray because he has very sharp intellect. He has some great argument, but when people like Douglas Murray glorify colonization, one of the most vicious, one of the most barbaric episode of human history, when MPs, I'm talking about a very recent incident, an MP of the UK, that we should be grateful to the colonizers, that we owe them. The colonizers robbed us, and now guess what? We owe them for being robbed by them. We owe you for being robbed by you. You robbed us in the first place. Now you are telling us that we owe you. How do you think it makes you look like? Does it make you look like you are civilized, or does it make you look like you are a savage? See, there is a difference between humility and arrogance. Until and unless, like, you can do a lot of things, you can claim all the things in the world, but until and unless you recognize your transient nature under the grand scheme of time, if you cannot recognize the worthlessness of your own existence, for the lack of a better word, okay, until and unless you realize it yourself, whatever else you are, I don't think you will be called civilized, or you could be regarded as civilized. Okay, so what is the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is your sheer arrogance. When it comes to the Western dialogue, when it comes to the Western discourse, you guys have a very arrogant attitude towards people coming from a different culture. Again, look, I mean no disrespect to anyone. Hundreds of millions of people have been slaughtered in India by the Abrahamic savages. Hundreds of millions. 6 million Jews have been killed, and there is a day of remembrance. We know the Holocaust Memorial Day, right? Again, look, I mean no disrespect, they deserve it. But guess what? 10 times more people have been slaughtered in India. We don't even get a recognition. Do you think those people, the people that have been murdered, do you think they deserve a mention? Do you honestly think so? If it is the case, then please do not remain silent, because guess what? If you remain silent, whatever else you are, it will only prove your arrogance. There is a gulf of difference between humility and arrogance. If you want to be civilized, if you want to be seen as civilized, how are you going to get there? How are you going to make peace? You can make peace, but you need to come from a position of strength. You have to acknowledge that a vast wrongdoing has been done. A grave mistake has been made. You have to acknowledge it again. Where do you want to come to that peace? You want to come from a position of weakness, or you want to come from a position of strength? See, there are a couple of things that we have already discussed in this series of talks. One thing I must emphasize is that civilization is defined by humility. Civilization is defined not by how many things that you achieve. We are not denying what the Europeans achieved. Nobody from the India will ever deny anything that has been invented by the Europeans. There is no denying, there is no arguing, right? We always give credit to the appropriate source, and we also deserve that these credits that originated in Bharat should be given to them as well. That is precisely what I'm saying, that East and West, like, we don't necessarily hate the West, but what I witnessed, I'm not talking about everyone, but what I witnessed based on the examples that I have provided, that West has a problem of arrogance. It has a problem of grandiose arrogance. Humility and arrogance, there is a gulf of difference. Let me give you one other example. The case of Ayodhya. When these Muslim barbarians, when these savages looted India, some 40,000 temples, not only that they slaughtered hundreds of millions of people, but they destroyed some 40,000 temples. Out of those 40,000 temples, one of the temple was the Ram Janmabhoomi temple, Ayodhya Ram Janmabhoomi temple. And when the Babri Mosque was built on top of that Ram Janmabhoomi, like this was the complex where Lord Rama was supposedly taken a human form. And there are a lot of things happened right after, because Babur, like a Mughal emperor, supposedly arguably built a temple on that premises. And again, this is not just one-off case. There are many such examples right now as I speak. You have, let's say for instance, Alaska Mosque. This is not related to Hinduism. The point that I am trying to make, this is definitely not related to Hinduism, like, so that you understand that I'm not making things up. When I'm saying that how the West contributed for the worse, I am just trying to highlight my point, okay? So bear with me for a moment. Let's say for instance Hagia Sophia. It has been converted into a mosque. Let's say for instance Temple of Solomon has been converted into a mosque. And there are many such examples. The destruction, the sheer destruction that has been done all over the world. All over the world. This is not just specific to one geographic location, though only the Buddhist statues have been destroyed by the Taliban. This is nothing like that. these destruction of the indigenous culture have been done by the Muslims for the last 1500 years. So out of those 40,000 temples that has been destroyed in Bharat, one of the temple was this Ram Janmabhoomi temple, and there are many cases currently being filed in the court right now in India. So one of these temple was this Ayodhya Ram Janmabhoomi temple, and later on the Hindus, I believe it was 1990, when some of the sadhus, they went to this mosque that was built on top of the temple, Victory of Islam. They destroyed that mosque and built or commemorated a temple on that same site. And there were widespread riots. I am talking about massacres, like there were many people died in all of these atrocities. Many Hindus, many Muslims obviously died, but in many instances Hindus have been targeted. First of all, this is the temple belong to the Hindus. Muslims are the invaders. They don't have any legitimate right in that piece of land. They have no rights whatsoever. They are the one who are invaders. They invaded this place. They destroyed our culture. And when we try to reclaim it, when we try to talk about our own rights, what happened? There were riots. There were massacres. And these massacres were not only limited to India. In Bangladesh in 1991, hundreds, like I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Thousands of women have been raped. Thousands of houses have been looted, vandalized. Okay, all of these atrocities have been committed because Hindus wanted to reclaim one of their looted sites. One of their looted sites, Hindus wanted to reclaim it for themselves. And how the West reacted to this situation, we will talk about it in a minute. Now, not only that these riots happened in 1991, and then again it happened in, let's say for instance, the Bombay car bombing. Yakub Menon, one of these Muslim, he orchestrated 13 car bombings. In 1993, some 260 people were massacred, more than 1,000 injured. And you know what happens out of an injury of a bomb explosion. You're probably crippled, you're probably disabled for your entire life. Their families have been affected. Like I'm talking about total destruction. And then you have the Godhara, Gujrat riot. 59 people have been burned alive. 59 people. What was their fault? Their fault was they protested against this Ram Janmabhoomi. Like they protested against this Babri Mosque. And they were coming from the protest in the train that was set on fire by people coming from the mosque, in a nearby mosque in the area called Godhara. And there were riots, of course. So these Ayodhya, the bottom line of this story, like there are so many things that happened. Temples have been vandalized in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. I'm talking about in magnitude of hundreds. Thousands of people have been massacred. I'm talking about Hindus by the Muslims. Thousands, whether it's car bombing, whether it's Godhara riot. And how did the West portray Hindus after all of these things? How did the so-called flag bearer of democracy portray Hindus after Hindus being targeted mercilessly, brutally? Do you really believe that this kind of portrayal make the people coming from India, make the people coming from the East happy? Do you honestly believe so? All the mainstream media, I'm talking about, like whether it's France, whether it's all countries pretty much, including of course United States, including, of course, the flag bearer of democracy. All of these countries, how did they portray the Hindus after being targeted, after being massacred? Again, I'm just giving you a couple of examples that what was the fault of the Hindus in all of these cases? What was the fault of the Hindus in Pakistan or in Bangladesh? What was the fault of the Hindus who were returning from Ayodhya temple on a train, who were minding their own business, sitting down in an office? I'm talking about the 1993 bombing. What was their fault? And how did the West react in all of these cases? They portrayed Hindus as the perpetrators. This is how the West portrayed the Hindus. So do you honestly think that with this kind of arrogance, justifying colonization, portraying, we talked about the cultural genocide, portraying Hindus as evil, demonic, we are talking about like the highest of the philosophy. When Bhagavad Gita is talking about divine vision, the highest of all philosophy of oneness, that is what Bhagavad Gita is saying. Do you honestly believe that your holy Bible can ever, you go to your Bible scholars, can you bring anything, even remotely? Some of the ideas that originate in Bhagavad Gita, the notion of non-attachment, for instance, karma yoga, the notion of non-attachment, the notion of sacrifice, polytheism, we are talking about divine vision, universal acceptance, universal brotherhood. You have reincarnation. Again, going back to polytheism, journey of a Pashu to Pashupati. You have strength, mental strength. In chapter 2, Bhagavan Krishna chastises Arjuna as he was guiding these Pandavas, these 5 brothers, that you have to shed this mental weakness. You have to slaughter your own family. We talked about those things in the previous episodes as well. It is an utmost, like in my humble opinion, this is the utmost sacrifice any literature has ever produced. Bhagavad Gita. It talks about sacrifice. It talks about shedding mental weakness. It talks about strength. It talks about polytheism, universal acceptance. It talks about illusion, not believing, rather being. What is the evil? If you think about the source of evil in this planet Earth, in this universe, what is the source of evil? The source of evil is believing. Believing a bunch of rubbish, believing a bunch of garbage. Let's talk about Holy Quran, shall we? Bhagavad Gita is telling that you cannot see. Krishna gave Arjuna divine vision that you cannot see. When Hinduism is talking about illusion, when Hinduism is talking about Maya, giving up the belief, what is the Western philosophy is all about? Believing a bunch of rubbish and then claiming that, civilization, claiming that, we are enlightened. Do you honestly believe that anything that came out of this Judeo-Christian philosophy can ever reach even close, let alone exceeding it, even close to what Bhagavad Gita has given to humanity? I mean, do you honestly believe so? I'd really love to know. What do you think about Bhagavad Gita? When it comes to civilizational dialogue, what exactly do you think about Bhagavad Gita? In contrast to Holy Quran and of course Holy Bible. Do you honestly believe so? Let me know, because I might as well learn something from you as well. So my point is that, see, we don't necessarily hate the West, but what we observed, again, I gave you lots of examples. And these examples are very, very, very painful examples. How we experienced some very condescending, some very unfair treatment from the West, to put it mildly. Okay. So, as we are discussing about civilization, if you want to truly claim that you are civilized, there is one thing really stands in between. That's your sheer arrogance. What is the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is your sheer, let me repeat, is your sheer arrogance. Unless you give it up, you people of the West, unless you give it up, no matter who you are, how many achievements you have, I'm sorry to say, you are not civilized yet. So that was the smaller elephant in the room, humility. As long as you do not have humility, you are uncivilized. But guess what? There is a bigger elephant in the room. What is the bigger elephant in the room? Any guess? Any wild guess? It is your sheer ignorance. To illustrate my point, there is an analogy that I came across from Swami Vivekananda, my intellectual master. So he gave an analogy that a frog that used to live in the ocean, and one day it fell into a well. And that well, there was another frog. So the next day, the frog that lives in that well, he was asking the other frog, the new frog, that is your ocean as big as this well? As he took a leap from one end of the well to the other. So the other frog was surprised that, what nonsense are you talking? That you compare your well to the ocean. The frog, he never saw ocean. So he couldn't understand. He thought, okay, what is this guy talking? Then he took another leap from that end to the other end. He repeated his question that, is your ocean as big as this? He took a leap from one end of the well to the other, and he was asking the other frog who lived in the ocean, is your ocean as big as this? Western civilization is this nonsense. When the Western philosophers talk about civilization, they basically compare themselves to that frog in the well. Again, this is the analogy by my intellectual master, Swami Vivekananda. And I couldn't find any better analogy than this. When I look at Western philosophy, this is the most fitting analogy that I could think of. When you guys lecture about civilization, when you guys lecture about, philosophy, you compare yourself to that frog in the well. Let me give you a couple of keywords. Individualism and collectivism. Like we discussed these two notions in much broader context in some previous episodes, okay? So individualism basically means that inequality, and collectivism means equality. So what is the problem of collectivism? The problem of collectivism is when you have equality in the society, that equality creates division. When you say that a group of people, they are all equal, that means now you have divided the society. Sounds very paradoxical, isn't it? If you have equality in the society, you have division. And what comes out of this division? Conquer. When you have divided the society, there comes out of conquer. Divide and conquer. So as long as the society has equality, as long as the society has collectivism, that society is uncivilized. So to uphold civilization, you have to uphold individualism. This is what the Bharatiyas realized some 7 to 10,000 years, could be as high as 15,000 years ago, that as long as you have collectivism in the society, that society is uncivilized. And that is why they moved from politics to religion. That is why they moved from collectivism to individualism, from equality to evolution. They moved from equality to evolution, from collectivism to individualism, from politics to religion. That what is collectivism? Politics. That is why they decided to move from politics to religion. You have been given civilization on a plate by the Bharatiyas. You people are so ignorant, so thick. I'm sorry to say, you people are so ignorant, so stupid that you haven't been able to understand this simple philosophy 15,000 years after Bharatiyas gave it to the humanity. That collectivism is not the right way for civilization. What is collectivism? Divide and conquer. When you say that some individuals are equal, this group is equal, that means you have divided the society. Divide, this division comes out of equality. And what comes out of division? Conquer. These divide and conquer, as long as the humanity is cursed by these equality, these divide and conquer, that society will never ever be civilized. Never ever. So nowadays you look at the Abrahamic philosophies, Judeo-Christian philosophies. What is the core of these ideologies? Divide and conquer. You have the believers and unbelievers. You have equality. As long as you have equality, in any way, in any shape or form, you have divide and conquer. So why do you need civilization? You need civilization so that a human being can reach their full potential. But as long as you have divide and conquer, how can an individual reach their full potential? It is not possible. In other words, your society is not civilized. So if you are Douglas Murray listening to this, tell your body, your ignorant body, to shove it up. I may sound very offensive, by the way, but I have to be. He said he is a PhD. My humble request to you would be, tell your ignorant body to shove it up into his rectum, his PhD, that piece of paper that he obtained, to shove it up into his rectum. That will make him more civilized. The only ideology that I happen to come across in this entire dialogue of civilization, Hinduism, one of the foundational principles, if you say that Hinduism is based on what? Inequality. Inequality is the bedrock of civilization. This is where civilization begins. Evolution. What is inequality? Evolution. How far can you evolve? Hinduism says that you can be a Raj Yogi, you can be free. Let alone divine vision, let alone being a Raj Yogi. You haven't come into the right track as of today. 15,000 years after Bharatiyas gave you all of these things, you are still in the wrong track. If you come to the right track, okay, now you are in the path of individualism. What is the highest an individual can achieve? Hindus are saying that you can achieve divine vision. You can achieve Advaita philosophy. You can attain freedom. We talked about freedom in the first episode, okay? That what exactly is freedom? What is the highest potential that a human being can achieve? We have been discussing all of those things in the last couple of episodes, okay? So forget about reaching your highest potential, but to realize that, okay, we are in the wrong direction. You haven't been able to realize it 15,000 years after Bharatiyas gave it to the humanity. How do you claim that you are civilized? how do you claim that you brought civilization? That collectivism is the wrong approach. That is why you have to move from politics to religion, from equality to evolution. This is a paradigm shift. What right now, as a model of civilization, what do we have now? We have equality. That means you are against evolution. If you are against evolution, then how an individual can reach their full potential? It is not possible. Simply not possible. You are still in the wrong track. You are stuck with the nonsense of democracy and all this BS. You are stuck with the nonsense of equality. How can you say that you are civilized? So before lecturing about civilization, before lecturing about, oh, we give this, we give that and all this nonsense, I would humbly, very humbly request you to study about Indian philosophy. Perhaps you will one day understand how ignorant you are. Compared to those Indian philosophers, how ignorant you are. Maybe you will understand someday. That is what I hope.